Hello, it's Phillip Taylor speaking from Richmond Green Chambers in London. This morning I'm looking at Archbold 2018. This is a brand new edition. It's well known to everybody in the criminal justice arena. It's Archbold's Criminal Pleading Evidence and Practice 2018. Been edited by P.J. Richardson, known to many of you, and a team of practitioner editors. We'll look at the book in a minute. The publishers are Sweet and Maxwell, Thomson Reuters, and of course there's been a considerable amount of debate about whether this is the better book or in fact its competitor Blackstone is the best book today, and it's called Game of Tomes. So they've had a lot of fun in the legal press and actually in the wider press about this, because of decisions that suggest that Archbold is on the way out and Blackstone is in the ascendancy. Not true at all. The fact is you've got to have both of them. It's as simple as that, and I make no bones about it. The reason for it is because what you've got in one book you may not have in the other. Now, in the old days, I would have said Archbold was the more complete version because of the amount of detail it had in it. But today, they offer different things for different types of practitioner. I personally am very comfortable with both of them, but I've always had a fondness for Archbold because when I did my bar school, we didn't have Blackstone, we only had Archbold. So I was actually quite pleased to just get used to Archbold, because it was only published once every few years, and of course it was in 2 volumes. But things have changed. Now, Elizabeth and I talked about the book, and we had a long discussion about how we were going to do the review, and what we've got as a title for this, in the documented Game of Tomes, which side will win? Now, I haven't put it in the review, but I'm going to say you decide, because it's your decision at the end of the day. Let's look at the book. It's a huge book, this one. This is the first part. There it is. There's the spine with Richardson's name on. And Sweet Maxwell, of course. There's the front of it. Now, it's a hardback. What a surprise. Now, in the back, you've got, on the inside back page, a lot of information. Very useful information about specific types of offence. It's actually indexed to model indictments is what it's called. So it's very much the Crown Court book, if you like. Useful references at the front. Inside you can see that there's an activation code, because everything's digital as well. Let's go to the back of it. You've got the actual chapter titles really right there. Then after that, let's go to the actual pages, the index itself. There we go, you can see the index there. It's a very heavy index, and it's by paragraph numbering. The pages, 3,468 is the page. So it's more than that because you've got cases at the front, but it's a huge book, and this is the main book, of course. This is the index, and Sweet and Maxwell have something called the legal taxonomy, which is the way they actually decide how to give specific names to things you'd be looking up. But you should be able to find everything pretty quickly, actually, within Archbold itself. The back of it, the last page, in fact, this is actually chapter 33. You can see the paragraph numbering at the sides there, and you can see all the way through the way the book is structured, with a little index for each chapter at the beginning and so on, and then the paragraph numbering and so forth. And if we go to the front, as I said, it's a very heavy book. You've got the actual front page there, and there's the blurb about the from Sweet and Maxwell and so forth. Then you've got, after that, it's Thomson Reuters, of course, who are also involved. Now, the first book was published, first edition, 1822, by J.F. Archbold. And it's got the list of all of the people who've been involved over the centuries. And they're coming up to their another anniversary before long. Now, this is the list of people involved. I can't mention them all by name. Known to many of you, I'm sure, and extremely helpful. This is the publisher's note for the 2018 edition. Always read that, because it sets out where we are at the moment. There are and have been quite a few changes, and obviously it does say they would always like to have feedback, so do give feedback to them about what you think of the book. There's the table of contents. You see I'm struggling even now to hold this. Then you've got service information about how the book is actually structured and how it works, and I think that again is something that you will find helpful. There's an update, of course, and there's actually a coding given there too. Then you've got abbreviations, always very helpful, and after the abbreviations, quite a lot of them, you've then got we start off actually with the after the abbreviations. This is the abbreviations of legislation, which again I think is useful because it has all of the PACE, for instance, all the usual suspects of the tables of statutes, of course. Then after that, lots and lots of lovely statutes, statutory instruments, of course, there. Then, of course, lots and lots of cases. And, of course, this is all the case law material for the non-UK cases as well are listed. Are a huge number of pages for all of that information. Then you have the table of practice directions. So you've got all these tables. Then we get on page 1, the indictment. And you see already we've got all of that material, you can see there, which is just the basic information about cases and so on. Then we get on to the book itself. And of course you've got a proper chapter index, if you like, at the beginning. So you should be able to find things. Then you can see how the book is worked. It's similar in many ways to the structure of of Blackstone, but the book, apart from being bigger, I have to say it's bigger, it is I think still more detailed, I have to say that, and it's written in a different way. Now to go with the book, there's the book, you've got the first supplement, which of course came out. This book came out last year, 2017. This the update is for the 14th of September 2017, and I'm recording this at the beginning of 2018. Now we've also got here the Archbold sentencing guidelines, and I think this also is extremely helpful. You can see that information there, and you can see the information on the back. Now if I can just go to these two books, they're both paperbacks. The supplement, of course, is really an update of what's actually in the main work, so do read them together. So when you're doing anything, if you're looking specifically at something in here, I was looking at something on restraint orders, for instance, do check to make sure nothing further has happened. So that's actually within the supplement. Then with the sentencing guidelines, you've got a very interesting structure. You've got the very little useful list of the criminal procedure rules. You've got the new cases that are listed on sentencing, and then you've got from that you've got practice directions, and you've got guidelines themselves. Now you will be aware, and I'm going to mention it, Banks on Sentencing, you will be aware of that book. This is the Sentencing Guidelines Council, which sets out overarching principles of seriousness. And then you've got a foreword, and then you've got the contents. So you can see the structure. It gives you the sentencing thresholds and the various steps, applicability of guidelines. You do know, of course, that the judges have their own materials as well. But this is a complete service, and that's exactly what the purpose of Sweden Maxwell and Thomson Reuters has been, to give you a complete service. And I have to say, I think there's more detail there, without cross-referring to lots of other books. But anyway, let's get on to the review itself. What do we say? Whichever tome you prefer on the subject of criminal law, rest assured that it has its own virtues. Archbold, however, just out from the new 2018 edition, recording this at the beginning of the year, is very virtuous indeed. With a publishing pedigree dating back to 1822, it's been considered by almost 2 centuries worth of criminal practitioners to be indispensable, during which time it has grown and grown as it continues to encompass the relentlessly expanding body of criminal law. And it's growing and growing and growing, just like the number of law reports from 1 volume to 4 and so forth. It's bound to be the case, but a halt to it will be called at some stage. Believe me, it always seems to happen. It comes in waves. Now, the first edition of Archbold was a mere inch or so thick, I am told. I believe I've seen a copy of it, and it was a relatively small book. At the end of the 20th century, however, it was contained in 2 large volumes, which in recent years has been incorporated for convenience into a single annual volume, but one of massive dimensions, owing of course to the depth and detail of the material therein. Now, this new edition, when you take into account the bit at the front, is about 3,900 pages long. So again, as I say, if you count the reference sections paginated by Roman numerals, and of course it's in a nice firm hardback. The pages are thin. It's a little bit like the white book behind as well. You've got to be a bit careful. And Stone's Justice's Manuals is another one. That's in 3 volumes, of course. But you get used to it, but you have to take a little bit of care. But of course, that's by no means all there is to this. There's a lot more. You get the cumulative supplements, which are published yearly as part of the service, and they contain updating material for the main volume with important developments highlighted on the back cover. And as I've said, it's important if you're looking for something quickly, that's actually quite helpful, I think. Now, the continuing updates, let's talk about them. Also part of the service, then you get the Archbold Review, and it's published 10 times a year, and its contents include cases in brief and cases in detail and more besides. It's a handy publication, in my opinion, because it gives you early warnings of the effects of new statutes. And I have to say, Parliament does make rather a lot of mistakes, and at the end of it all, we've got to try and deal with what we've got. And so this book and its colleagues, if you like, if I call it that way, are actually our guardian angels, in the sense of telling us how we go about sorting out what sometimes is a complete mess of legislation coming from Westminster. But that's another story. Now, another hefty volume, which I've shown you, is this one here. That's the sentencing guidelines. Now, that is also a sort of supplement, and it includes the new Magistrates' Court sentencing guidelines as well, which I think is of help. So all guidelines featured in the supplement, including those on the Sentencing Guidelines Council, are listed on the back cover, and that will help you. Now, let's talk now about the online side. Then there's this Archbold e-update, as it's called, to which you as a subscriber will have free and unlimited access. You get an email containing the latest relevant updates in crime. I think that's very helpful indeed. And another advantage is that the e-update is cross-referenced by paragraph to the main volume. So you should find things again, I think, pretty quickly. And it allows you to put the information in Archbold in context. There's also a dedicated site on which you can look up archived material. And speaking of updates, we are reminded by the publisher, Sweet & Maxwell, that each new edition of Archbold includes all significant developments in legislation and case law from the past year. And that's what you're getting. The supplements obviously gives you the much quicker stuff, and you will have the criminal law review as well. Again, it's important to mention that because you've got a number of different sources that you've actually got to refer to. And of course, the 2018 edition of Archbold, this one here, features, it's only one example, 3 Acts of Parliament which have been published and which are of particular significance to practitioners. They include the Investigatory Powers Act 2016, which is very heavily criticised in some quarters, and the Policing and Crime Act 2017, which covers an interesting mix of topics such as offences involving in putting people in fear of violence and the regulation of firearms and pyrotechnic articles. And the Act has amended the pace extensively. And can I just say again, Parliament has had this unfortunate habit of putting a whole mishmash of different areas of law, if you like, into one Act of Parliament, LASPO being a good example. I'm very unhappy about that myself, because I think it's much more sensible to have specific areas. But that's the way they're doing their parliamentary business, and at the end of the day we have to go by what they do. But it would be nice if they had a bit more of a logical logical structure about the way in which some of this legislation is produced, because the day will come when, I've been talking about it for 50 years now, I suppose. The day will come when we will have codification. There's no question in my mind that that will happen. When it does, we'll see where we go with that. But at the moment, we are in this cusp of the new artificial intelligence, the new IT developments, and the fourth industrial revolution, and there are big changes afoot. Now, to summarise, as I say, you've got these splendid new acts which are covered, and there's very useful information contained in this book, which of course is of great assistance probably to the courts at the end of the day when you're making submissions. And can I just say that Archbold is to be used in conjunction with Blackstone, so they're not really in competition. It's lovely to have a joke about Game of Tomes, but the bottom line is, you've got to use both of them and other ones as well, and we all know that. But don't spoil a good story by getting the facts in the way in the press. I mean, we don't want that, do we? Okay, thirdly, let me talk about something else, and that's the Criminal Finances Act 2017, which made a series of amendments to the Proceeds of Crime Act 2002, which I don't think is a particularly brilliant piece of legislation. In practice, it has caused some problems, and it's time they did look at that again. I mean, I'm not criticising the aim of it, I'm just saying again, in practice, a little bit more thought would have helped, I think, practitioners a lot more, and the judiciary for that matter. That's another story. Now, among other things, of course, the new Act makes provision in relation to terrorist property and creates corporate offences in such matters as tax evasion. That's going to be revisited, certainly I would have thought, with the next Parliament, and we'll see where we go. Also included, of course, in this new edition for 2018, a series of amendments to the criminal procedure rules and the practice directions. And now for some statistics, and don't worry, this summary is a mercifully short one. Archbold contains 33 chapters, also usefully listed on a separate card right at the back, on the back inside page. And also you've got the criminal procedure rules listed there too. And on the inside front cover there's a list of useful references. And I do think this is quite helpful because it's if you like, it's a bit of an idiot's guide, so you can find things quickly. And the book also contains, of course, 8 tables no less of statutes, cases, etc. Now, I think the final point to say is this is venerable yet modern, and I think that's a nice subtitle Elizabeth put in there. It seems fortunately that as this venerable but relentlessly modern tome continues to expand, all kinds of improvements have been made to enhance its accessibility. Despite its size, it does weigh a ton, very heavy, and you'll see that again in a minute. If you'll pardon the slight exaggeration of being a ton, it's heavy. Archbold is straightforward to use. You've got to know your way around it. It's just like all the other books, basically. It's a technique. But once you know it, you understand the numbering paragraphs, which they've got throughout. You should be able to find what you want. You've got very detailed tables of contents, and I think a clearer and cleaner index, as the publishers call it, which is almost 100 pages long at the back. And as I say, that should allow you to find things quite quickly. I have used it recently, and I did find what I was looking for pretty quickly. Finally, in the criminal courts of England and Wales, Archbold has been preferred, there's no question of that, or at least the most commonly used work of reference. That's in the past. And it's to be hoped that this preference will continue to be respected, and almost without doubt it will be, in my view. But as I say, you've got a new generation of people who've learnt on Blackstone, and so there will be changes. But you've got to use both of them. It really is as simple as that, until the day comes when perhaps some further changes will happen. As I say, it's to be hoped that you will continue to use both of them in the courts. Obviously, there's this despite the recent and rather amusing labelled carry on, if I can put it that way, references the Game of Tomes. I mean, it is funny, but there's a serious side to it. I'm not suggesting any form of impropriety, that's nonsense. The fact is that we've got to use what's available to us, and as I've said before, you will use a range of different books. I personally like Archbold, but I like Blackstone as well. I'm used to both of them now, and I'm sure the judges are. So each will have his own preference. And at the end of the day, that's what it's all about. So what is of benefit then to practitioners is that they have a choice of which tome to use. And it's becoming increasingly evident many will decide to choose both. That's our final point. And I say to you, just remember one thing. You've got a choice. And we've got the information. I can remember 50 years ago when it was really difficult to get a lot of information. Access to justice in those days was, actually people complain about it today, but it was really difficult. You couldn't get access to a law library. You couldn't see these publications, so you had to go to a lawyer. Today, this stuff is available, and if you know where to look, there are so many unrepresented parties around. This sort of information, these videos that I do, I hope will be of some help to you. We're not trying to sell these books, we're trying to explain what's in them so that you, depending on what you need, will be able to find this stuff quite quickly. I want to thank everybody involved in producing Archbold. There it is there. I'm just going to show you the list of the people, because it is important to bear in mind that a lot of people have been involved in this publication. These are the people with Richardson at the top. There we go. These are the people who've done the work. And, you know, I'm very grateful. This is where the law is today. This is where you find what you need. This is where the law, the practice, the procedure, and everything is contained. I'm very grateful that we have this, and we're indebted to all of you. And also, finally, to the publishers. Sweet and Maxwell are the premier, effectively, publishers through Thomson Reuters of all of the main common law library publications. This one, in addition, they are at the top of the list. Let's be in no doubt about that. And the service they give us, I think, is equal to none. And I'd like to thank all of them very much indeed. We appreciate that as practitioners, because our job would be it's difficult enough as it is, but it would be virtually impossible to do a really good job without having access to this material. So thank you to all. Goodbye.